The category is What the Trans, darling?
Hello, and welcome to What the Trans!
What the Trans?
What the Trans indeed. Ashley, how are you doing? I hear you have become even more of a rock star than you already were.
I'm told this as well, and that's super because, yes, of course, I mentioned on the Facebook and on the Twitter and everything else, I'm in a band. Don't know if I've mentioned that before. Don't think I have. But yes, I'm in a band, and we released an album at the start of this month, and it's going very nicely. We've had like radio play and all that sort of thing, but even more excitingly, a few weeks ago we went to a venue in sunny Manchester and filmed us playing through the entire album live, which it turns out takes quite a lot out of you because we hadn't considered that we would actually be playing the entire album through live. So now we've done it once, we're probably not going to do it again. So it's a good job it's going to be on YouTube. So yes, there is a St. Lucifer live playing Death Crush Polari on July the 18th on the YouTubes. We shall put a link in the description, but that is at 7:30pm British Standard Time because we don't seem to use GMT anymore. That's fine. So yes, watch Gig. It's fun. And also stream album. It's on Bandcamp and Spotify and all that sort of thing. It's been jolly exciting. And I've got to be honest, it's really weird when Spotify and Apple Music and Bandcamp email me to say, hey, St. Lucifer have a new album out. Do they? Do they really? I mean, come on, man. Yeah, I know. I was there. But yes, anyway, how are you?
I'm alright. Nothing that exciting to report. I bought a vegetable.
Oh, yes.
It was fine.
Yeah.
I might not die now. I heard that if you eat those, you live forever.
Kind of, yeah. You know, I mean, not dying is kind of the point of it, I suppose. Or, you know, it's something that people who want to live, you know, concentrate on not dying if they want to live. It kind of makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does, but, you know, I'd give it a 2 out of 5 as an experience eating a vegetable.
It's all about the preparation, isn't it? Living as I do with a vegetarian, the overwhelming majority of the meals I eat now are, you know, corn and, well, not corn's rubbish, but, you know, lots of sweet potato curry, a lot of butternut squash.
That might be where I messed up, because I did just eat a stick of celery out the bag.
Right.
Whilst watching Bo Burnham's Inside for the 18th time.
Okay.
I think I did it wrong.
Perhaps. It's about the preparation. Let's exchange recipes later.
Yeah, and listeners, if you happen to know how Michelle Me can eat a vegetable without it being sad, please get in touch on all of the things that we have at What the Trans on all of the things. But yes, we've got to do something. What are we going to do now?
What's next on the... Oh, not the news.
Oh, God, the news. It never ends. But this time, we got breaking news on a developing story.
We do.
As well as providing new information for something that is very, very interesting to our audience at the very least. So let's get into that.
Yes.
So a while ago, we reported on a Pink News story concerning the government's LGBT advisor, Dr. Michael Brady, and why Gender Recognition Act reform was binned by this terrible, terrible government.
Dreadful. Fucking... Don't get me started. Don't get me started.
In the Pink News report, it said that, and I quote, GEO court documents show Truss was told that Dr. Michael Brady, National Advisor for LGBT Health, said that there wasn't any stigma attached to including a gender dysphoria requirement in legal gender recognition.
Pink News then went on to report that the judgment stated that Liz Truss, Minister for Women and Equalities, was previously interested in removing the requirement for a diagnosis of gender dysphoria to gain a gender recognition certificate, but by the end of June had changed her mind and would instead seek to keep the need for a diagnosis, but to reword it as gender incongruence. In the community, this was at the time read by many as Dr. Brady being the reason why the GRA was ultimately not reformed and would continue to include a medical requirement. On the whole, with some exceptions, the community appeared to be massively in favour of removing any medical requirements to change legal gender, in line with multiple countries, including the Republic of Ireland, Malta, Argentina, India, India's complicated, but sort of, many US states and Canadian territories, as well as very soon, Spain. However, thanks to a Freedom of Information request we made to the Department of Health and Social Care, we can reveal that there are signs that Liz Truss never actually intended to remove the need for some kind of medical requirement from the Gender Recognition Act and this whole thing was purely about the phrase gender dysphoria. From our Freedom of Information request, we received a briefing note dated the 12th of June last year, prepared by Department of Health and Social Care officials for their then Secretary of State, Matt Hancock, the guy who lost his job for being too horny to not spread a disease in a pandemic instead of possibly being responsible for the death of tens of thousands of people. That happened, what the fuck. Anyway, the briefing note for Hancock was sent to him to prepare him for a discussion with Liz Truss about Gender Recognition Act reform, as well as transgender issues in general, and as part of that, it states, Liz Truss is minded to remove the gender dysphoria diagnosis from the GRA for those wishing to apply for a gender recognition certificate, replacing it with reference to a requirement for a specified medical practitioner to assess an applicant's psychological readiness or fitness to proceed. It goes on to say, her officials have told us that she does not want to change the application process, but rather is nervous about the term gender dysphoria. She is concerned there may be stigma associated with this term. I don't understand where she got that from, but okay. It is intended to be a positive step rather than an intention to impose more stringent requirements than what is currently in place.
Could have fooled me.
It is our view, however, that the term gender dysphoria is internationally recognised by both the medical and transgender community, and we don't believe there is any stigma attached to its use. The National Advisor for LGBT Health at the NHSEI shares his view. That's referring to Dr. Brady specifically. Basically, this briefing note suggests that Truss did not intend to reform the Gender Recognition Act to remove the medical requirement, and Dr. Brady's comments were referring specifically to the use of the phrase gender dysphoria if a medical requirement was going to be maintained. The document that we got from this Freedom of Information request backs what Dr. Brady himself said in a statement recently, where he said, I was asked to provide advice on the wording in the GRA in May and June of 2020. At that time, it was made clear to me that the requirement for a medical assessment and diagnosis was not going to be removed from the GRA, and there was not going to be a move towards self-identification. I was simply asked to advise on the use of the term gender dysphoria in the GRA. So Dr. Brady was not the reason that self-ID did not happen. It probably never was going to happen, but we have more Freedom of Information requests in the works to try and get to the bottom of just what the hell happened last summer in the lead up to the government binning Gender Recognition Act reform. But that is not all that was revealed in the briefing document we received. The document also reveals that Liz Truss wanted to announce a review of transgender healthcare led by the Department of Health and Social Care, and suggested during the first 3 months of the COVID-19 pandemic she was trying to make this happen. The reason given in the briefing document was, and I quote, it is our understanding that Number 10 and GEO officials are concerned that gender identity has become an answer for children and young adults who actually have a range of complex social and mental health issues. It also goes on to say, a further concern of Number 10 is regarding what is often referred to as the affirmation-based approach to gender dysphoria, whereby it has been suggested that young people are fast-tracked into potentially irreversible treatment without the appropriate psychological evaluation. Now, this claim that GIDS, the UK's only NHS trans health service for under 18s, is rushing people has been echoed a lot in the press, but every single person we have ever spoken to, parent or young person, on the record, off the record, in any capacity through doing work on this podcast, has said it has taken them years to get through GIDS, and most of those that we've talked to actually aged out of the service before getting any treatment. The document went on to warn Matt Hancock that a review of transgender healthcare at that time could be a distraction from their ongoing response to the pandemic, as well as questioning whether it was the right time to do a review, as other reviews were already being carried out by NICE and the NHS in the form of the CAS review, which is currently ongoing. The document then stated, it is worth noting that if this review has a focus on children's services, this isn't related to the GRA. Children can't get a certificate, and services for children and young people don't require one. So to summarise, Dr. Brady was not the reason why the GRA was not reformed to a self-ID model, and Liz Truss was lobbying the Department of Health and Social Care to do a review of trans healthcare during the opening months of the pandemic, apparently because Number 10 and GEO officials are worried that trans kids aren't really trans. What do you think of all that? There's a lot there, I know, but what do you think?
There is a lot of that, isn't it? And it makes sense with what we know about the main players, shall we say, so to wit Dr. Brady and Liz Truss. Clearly there was never really an intention to actually meaningfully change the Gender Recognition Act, and the fact that they've brought in this idea that, Number 10 is concerned that being trans is actually just a load of other health and social problems, or, mental health problems, is like, even if it was, you still wouldn't fucking do anything about it, you Tory pricks. But it's kind of not surprising.
But there's definitely some questions to be asked here. I want to draw attention to the consultation itself that took place between 2017 and a billion years later, because it never ended. The question was phrased in the consultation that was asked of everyone. Do you think there should be a requirement in the future for a diagnosis of gender dysphoria? And the results were 35.5% yes, 63.2% no. Meaning most people were like, no, there shouldn't be a requirement for a diagnosis of gender dysphoria. But the wording of that isn't removing a medical diagnosis. It isn't a question saying, should it be a self-declaration model or self-ID model? It's quite possible, but I don't think anyone can know this for sure as yet, but it's quite possible that Liz Truss was trying to weaselly follow the consultation by following it to the letter while still making sure there was a medical requirement. I can see that being the case, but I don't know.
It's not beyond the realms of possibility, but yes.
Yeah, and then it also needs to be considered that Liz Truss follows anti-trans groups on social media who have pushed rapid onset gender dysphoria, the nonsense thing that came from a survey that was listed on a bunch of anti-trans websites, where they basically asked a bunch of parents, do you think your kids caught it off the internet? And these transphobic parents were like, yeah, I think they do. I think they did. Nothing concrete about ROGD is in this in this document that we got. But the idea from the media who has repeated the ROGD thing, the people that Liz Truss follows, all repeating the stuff about ROGD being a real thing when it isn't, and all the stuff from the Bell Tavistock case where it's like, oh, it's too fast.
Young people are being rushed through into irreversible changes.
Yeah, there doesn't appear to be any evidence that actually concurs with that, except the so-called testimony from so-called whistleblowers, who, so far, all of them have a proven history of being ideologically opposed to trans people existing in some form, as well as, one of those people being Marcus Evans, who recently wrote a pro-conversion therapy book aimed at trans people with his wife Susan Evans. There's so many questions here about how the government came to this conclusion, and it really raises questions to their intentions for the conversion therapy ban.
Yes.
Because if number 10 officials don't know if that's Boris Johnson, that's all it says, number 10 officials, and GEO officials don't know if it's Liz Truss, but I'd say it probably is if I had to guess. Will their attitudes last year impact the decision to include trans people and trans youths in a conversion therapy ban? It's an incomplete picture at the moment, completely incomplete, because we're going off a document from last year and don't know where they are today. But there is some worrying things from this. Yeah,
absolutely. And given the kind of, the direction this government's tending, not just with LGBT issues, of course, with the protest bill, the, increased police powers and all that sort of thing, it kind of suggests something kind of authoritarian, which is probably not going to be very good for lots of communities, and obviously it's certainly not going to be good for the trans community. So yeah, we shall see. But I mean, we've already had lots of people on social media suggesting that the government absolutely plan to, crowbar in some sort of exemption for, conversion therapy is banned except if you're trans. And then we will, stick you under a microscope every day of your life for the next 3 years. To make sure that it's not just a series of complex social and mental health problems. I was like, okay, great.
It does feel like that they are cooking up something. I mean, if you wanted to justify excluding trans people from a conversion therapy bill, doing a consultation where you ask the general public, considering the media atmosphere that has been set up around this issue of trans identities being in question, of people being rushed in too fast, of healthcare eradicating LGB people, which the LGBT Alliance has claimed in the national press several times. Asking the public to consult on the issue may be a way for you to justify doing that down the line, but I don't know that for sure. And if that is the case, then it would mean the government are really overly relying on media narratives reflecting the opinion of the general population.
Well, so when we finally saw the results of the consultation, which I think started actually in 2018 rather than 2017, when we finally saw the results of that, it showed that overwhelmingly, 60 to 70% of all of the responses were supporting the trans community and saying, yes, we need self-ID, which the government then chose to spin as, oh, well, trans activists have infiltrated this and swung it the wrong way, so we're just going to ignore that data.
Yeah, and that's the thing. The actual wording of it didn't even include self-ID, it turns out. That's an interesting nugget.
Well, yeah, but then so the consultation, it didn't want to ask too many leading questions, because I'm sure the people who put the consultation together, knew what they were doing. And obviously people that answered and said, well, no, what we need is self-ID when it comes to, is this requirement onerous? Is this requirement onerous? Because that's what I did. When I filled in that consultation back in 2018, I felt I made an extremely thorough case for changing the GRA beyond recognition in its current form, making it less bureaucratic, but they decided to ignore all of that, everybody that wrote in support of the trans community, including lots of trans people themselves, obviously, and said, no, because trans activists said the wrong thing, so we're just going to ignore it and go along with what the minority people say, which obviously it was getting spammed by anti-trans groups just as much.
Yeah, that was what appeared in the leak in the Times last June in the Tim Shipman report, where he reported that a source in government said that the government were planning, and I don't think these were about Gender Recognition Act reform, but they were included in a story about that, but saying Liz Truss is going to try and protect single-sex spaces, which we all know that means protect them from us, and a whole bunch of other things. And in that, it was we're not going to follow the consultation because it's been spammed by trans activists, was essentially what Tim Shipman's source said.
The opposite of what actually happened.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it was good to finally get to the bottom of this, but obviously there's kind of more coming, isn't there?
This is what you would class as a developing story, I guess. I think it's safe to say that Dr. Brady is not the reason why self-ID didn't happen or why GRA reform didn't happen. I think that's pretty obvious at this point. But yeah, there's more to find, and we're going to try and find it over the coming months, I think, because I desperately want to know what the fuck happened behind closed doors last summer.
Well, we've submitted a bunch of Freedom of Information requests on that very subject, haven't we? So more on that as we get results for them, or indeed if we quite specifically don't get results to some of them, because that is itself worth remarking on. But I think we should move on.
Yes, we got some fascism going on.
We do have some fascism going on. Hooray! And in fairness, this is fascism in another country. So you might have heard about an incident from Los Angeles over the last week or two. So at the Wee Spa in Koreatown. And this was sparked after an Instagram user whose feed seems to be mostly Christian memes filmed herself harassing the spa's receptionist and accusing them of letting a naked transgender person in to use the women's section of the business. The Instagram user, who we'll just call Karen, spent several minutes on film shouting at a member of the spa staff that she had seen a penis on the women's side of the spa. Now, in light of subsequent events, which we'll get to in a minute, there is a lot of doubt amongst the spa staff themselves and the LAPD as to whether there was even a trans person in there to begin with. But Karen claimed without evidence that there was, and she did so very loudly and filmed herself. So far, so turf. However, the internet being what it is, very soon flyers were circulating for a protest to be held outside of the spa on July the 3rd. This flyer was then shared in far-right, religious right and turf spaces quite widely, with discussion of the alleged incident popping up on places like Mumsnet and Spinster because, of course. Now, come the day of the protest itself, the anti-trans crowd were a wholesome mix of fundamentalist Christians, QAnon conspiracy adherents shouting, "Save our children!" and those hardy perennials, the fucking Proud Boys who were armed to the teeth. Now, right-wing disinformation specialist Andy Ngo was also there. There was also a counter-protest of LGBT people and their allies. And one of the anti-trans protesters who was seen in videos with the Proud Boys cadre stabbed 2 people. One of the LGBT plus counter-protesters who seemingly has been hospitalised by the wound, and then followed it up by stabbing one of his own anti-trans allies in the leg when she was helping him up off the ground.
Jesus Christ.
I know, right? Now, online, of course, this became that those vicious trans people had repeatedly stabbed a brave, patriotic defender of free speech and our children. But until video emerged showing that, no, the Nazi stabbed someone on his own side of the line. But even now, there are, of course, Twitter and other social media users spouting that, nope, fake news, trans people are dangerous. Again, though, the trans people were not the ones going armed to a protest. That is not something that peaceful protesters tend to do. You go armed when you want to start trouble, which is exactly what they did. But this incident by itself does cast some light on a much wider problem. An incident which didn't happen is then puffed up into a cause célèbre for the far right and their allies, a completely manufactured outrage upon which the right depends. It can be Dr. Seuss or critical race theory or footballers taking the knee, but time and again we see the same pattern. Make up a problem that doesn't exist and then get angry about it, and then use that fake anger to pressure people, to bully people to do what you want. The far right and their allies are trying, it must be said with some success, to weaponise the issue of trans rights. Now, over here in the UK, Dr. Joe Mulhall of Hope Not Hate, the anti-extremism watchdog group, told the Herald Scotland on July the 4th that we see more anti-trans content from within the far right than against any other minority today. They disproportionately talk about trans rights way more than Muslims now. Dr. Mulhall sees transphobia as a more publicly acceptable form of discrimination, far more so than things like anti-Semitism. He says that while transphobia is socially acceptable, talking about Jews isn't. It ostracizes you, but if you talk about trans issues, it opens the doors to the mainstream. The far right are saying things they know will be echoed in the comment pages of the right-wing press. There is a strategy here. Right-wing groups working together to inflame a moral panic both here and in the US, and an article on Truth or Fiction, which we will include in the description, makes the links between these groups very clear in the context of this incident outside the spa. Of course, the folks over at the Trans Safety Network have also put out a statement about this incident, saying there appears to have been an organised right-wing campaign here to drive a moral panic against trans people and change California's laws around trans equality. It led to several people getting hurt, including 2 people getting stabbed, as we've mentioned, and this shows the importance of critical journalistic investigation around viral stories and the need to check what is actually substantiable rather than press ahead trying to cash in. So, this is one drop in the ocean, but it was a drop that's very well documented because there's footage. There's been a couple of Twitter users who do work for various newspapers in LA who were there, and one of them was actually hit by one of the counter-protesters using something like a big pipe. He had a vest with press written on it, and yet still he was attacked by these people. It's not good, essentially, and the links between groups in the US, like the Heritage Foundation and so on, and the groups here in the UK they're there, right? They're there to be seen. The Truth or Fiction article that I mentioned, there's some of it in there, but this is stuff that we have been talking about for months, if not years. There is a concerted campaign against trans people being funded by American evangelical groups in league with their literally fascist allies. Ugh.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was a bit of a rant, wasn't it?
It was a rant worth making. Yeah, we got most of the information on this from, again, the Trans Safety Network and also
the LA Blade.
Yeah, LA Blade did a really good report on this where they kind of broke the idea of this whole thing, this whole trans woman being in a spa may never have actually occurred, which appears to have come from Trans Safety Network themselves. Trans Safety Network were the first people to really put together a timeline on this and question whether this event was even true. And also should probably shout out to Vishal P. Singh, a gonzo journalist based in Los Angeles who has been covering this from the start. Vishal is basically a freelancer who follows fascism and anti-fascism based incidents much in the same way that Andy Ngo does. He appears to do it from the angle that fascism is bad.
As, most people should, really, whereas Andy Ngo is, Mr. Coordinator, Mr., manufacture some fake news to inflame our right-wing allies, which is just, what a disappointing human being he is.
Yeah. But I think the big thing to take from this is, looking at what Joe Mulhall from Hope Not Hate was saying, the UK press has reported quite badly about the trans community for a very long time, for 5 years now, and the far right appear to have taken that as a recruiting tool, absolutely. And there is a comparison to be made, although it's not exactly the same, there is a comparison to be made that post 9/11, UK fascism did an about turn against the Muslim community and used Islamophobic concerns as a recruitment tool because Islam and Muslims in general were being debated quite negatively in the press for a number of years, and fascists and the far right seem to capitalise on that. And it sounds like a very similar thing is happening again with trans people now. But I should point out that I did check out the Hope Not Hate report on the state of hate last year, and I've not done that much following of the far right. It's just not something that's necessarily crossed my desk. But the numbers of the members of these groups aren't exactly amazing. The far right in the UK is on the rise, but also incredibly disorganised and so full of infighting. It was amazing to me. It was like, they all hate each other.
Yeah.
Maybe even as much as they hate us. It's very strange.
Well, they just hate, and when you've had hatred on your tongue for so long, you don't know how to spit it out. And so it just ends up coming out at everybody, even the people on your side. And it's like, well, no, this guy says he's in our movement, but he's not really because of X, Y, Z, and it's just nonsense. It's just hate for hate's sake.
Yeah. Yeah, and the signs for this have been out there for years. Like, there was Posey Parker going on a white nationalist YouTube channel. There was Wolf putting together a submission for the UN, which was signed by several Southern Poverty Law Centre designated hate groups, and also Graham Linehan and a bunch of prominent UK anti-trans activists. This is something the Trans Safety Network, which if you aren't following them at this point, you should. Like, what are you doing? They're amazing. Follow them now. Go find them online, transsafety.network, or go follow them on Twitter. We'll have all the links in the description for all them, because you should follow them. But yeah, they've been following this for a long time now, where they've been pointing out, oh look, there's a GC person called Jennifer Billick who has been spreading anti-Semitic conspiracy theories about Jewish billionaires turning the world trans for their ends. Like, that's a thing. Like, the far-right links and the far-right crossover has been a thing for years, and now we are seeing in the States what that looks like in camera form, and it's in the form of violence based on events that may not have even happened. That is so. Yeah. If people had any doubt about what the GC community was, I think this puts it to rest any debate that may have been happening about GC people being aligned with the far right or even involved with the far right. I mean, all the signs are out there and have been for years.
It's there, it's happening, and it's the GC group, or I've seen them referred to as the Trans Exterminationist Movement, which seems terrifyingly
accurate.
It is. It's accurate and terrifying. They're just fascists. There's no other way to put it. Anyway, onward, I think.
Yes, onward to talking about the community itself and the people in it, and specifically trans community health.
Woo!
Yeah. On the day of recording this, which is the 8th of July, NHS England released the result of their GP patient survey. The survey was originally sent out to 2 million people in the UK, and this time they asked about the respondents' gender identity. So we've now got some data on the state of health in the community. Now, we just got this. Like, I just managed to figure it out a couple of hours before we started recording. So I haven't been able to break this down by gender identity, like trans men, trans women, non-binary people, etc. But as an overall spread of the community's health, it reveals some very interesting things and some very predictable things. So the results are broken down and compare the results between those who answered no to the question, is your gender identity the same as the sex you were registered at birth? And people who answered yes. So it's basically the transgender group and the rest of the respondents.
Yes.
That's how this is broken down. So the results showed that transgender respondents were less likely to have positive experiences than the main body of respondents with their GP's practice. Whilst 4% of both groups report fairly poor experiences with their GP's practice, 4% of trans respondents said their experience was very poor, compared to just 2% of the main body of respondents. Now, that's still quite low in the grand scheme of things. Right, we could make a headline thing. Twice as many trans people have negative experiences compared to cis people, but that wouldn't entirely be accurate because the number is still vanishingly small, but not insignificant. But also, trans respondents were twice as likely to suffer falls that have needed medical attention in the last 12 months, with 2% of the main body of respondents saying they had, compared to 5% of trans people. And I currently have no idea why that is the case and can't find anything on why trans people will be suffering falls in their home or falls that would require medical attention. There are definite questions to be asked there, but moving on to the other results.
High heels are dangerous, I guess. Anyway, go on.
I mean, maybe. There is a darker theory I have that we'll get into later, but I'm hoping that must be it. What is less surprising is almost a quarter, 24% of trans respondents reported that they had felt isolated over the previous 12 months, whereas compared to only 15% of the main body of respondents. Obviously not surprising. Trans people feeling very isolated in lockdown could only be compounded by not be having access to their community, which is going to be a main part of our meet today, where I go over my experiences at Trans Pride London, but more on that in a bit. So when the survey asked respondents if they have any long-term physical or mental health conditions, disabilities, or illnesses, again, the results are not surprising. 51% of the main body of respondents said yes, compared to 56% of trans respondents. And when these issues were broken down by different types, it reveals that trans people are far more likely to suffer mental health conditions, with 25% saying that they have a long-term mental health condition, compared to just 11% of the main body of respondents. And it was also, trans respondents were twice as likely to be living with dementia, which was a 2%, 4% split once again. A learning disability, which was 2% of the main body saying they had a learning disability, 5% of trans people saying they had a learning disability, and also twice as likely to have some kind of blindness or partial sight condition, which was again a 2%, 4% split. Now, data from the survey also report that 7% of trans respondents reported themselves as being autistic, compared to 1% of the main body respondents, which, if you are familiar with the trans community, is probably no surprise. There may be a chance this is used as an ableist weapon against trans identities and especially autistic people, but it needs to be said that would be a bullshit thing to do, so don't you dare entertain that vile and ridiculous idea. Autistic people are valid, and the number of them in our community doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything. We've just got more people who know they are autistic than the general population. That's basically what is going on. I believe. I should put I believe in there.
Allegedly.
Yes, but overall the impression from the results of this are fairly predictable. Trans people are more likely to have negative experiences at the GP surgery and more likely to suffer from various health conditions, as well as being more likely to report themselves as being autistic. But now we can see some numbers about our community and the healthcare issues that we have that may be unique to other minorities and the general population in general. This may lead to positive changes inside the NHS, as now we have some very comprehensive data on our healthcare needs. And as a community, that can only be a positive.
Indeed. It's, if you're trying to convince somebody or several somebodies that there is a problem, data is a very good way of doing that. And I don't mean the character from Star Trek The Next Generation, played by Brent Spiner, although he does explain things quite well. But as in, if you've got the information, then you can demonstrate and say, hey, look, here's where we need some additional support. Here's where we've noticed a problem that we can fix quite easily by doing X, Y, and Z. So, yes, it's, as you say, this is not surprising. But yeah. So, go on, what was your darker theory?
The darker theory is I'm basing this on nothing. This is a leap. I'll be the first to admit this is a leap. But it is based on data from Gallup's transphobic hate crime report that they released in 2020, where basically the argument was that trans people are more likely to suffer abuse and suffer physical violence and the threat of sexual assault and all sorts of things. So with trans people being in lockdown, I think that it is a possibility that those falls may be explained as acts of abuse in the home. I mean, I don't know. I can't say that for sure.
Yeah, respectfully, I see what you're saying, but it is kind of a bit of a leap, isn't it? I mean...
Yeah, I mean, there's it could be quite possible that trans people are more likely to suffer accidents in the home for some reason that is completely unrelated to this, and maybe I'm doing that thing that humans do this. Humans look for patterns.
We do. We're great at pattern matching.
Yeah, and that is partially why so many conspiracy theories exist. That flaw in our brain. So I may be doing that right now, but maybe there is something to this. I think that I would like to see more questions being asked in the form of research and stuff to get to the bottom of why trans people were twice as likely to suffer falls needed medical attention. That raises questions.
That is interesting, but then it could just be something as simple as your sample size, depending on how big it is, and this was 2 million people, is by definition going to contain some results that look significant but actually kind of aren't. And this is like a constant or a perennial problem, shall we say, in actual medical research, because just occasionally something will, just through the play of chance, appear to be like, wow, that's a huge change, and actually it was just fairly coincidental. So... because that's how chance works. Anyway,
well, I can say that the number of respondents who answered no to the question, does your gender identity match with the stuff you were assigned at birth? It was about 5,500 that said no to that question, and there was another 8,500 roughly who said that they would prefer not to say. So it is quite. So there's quite a large sample size if you just look at the definite no's. That we can confirm. Yeah. There may be so many more trans people in the prefer not to say thing. Or maybe a lot of people had no idea how to answer the question, like cis people, and just prefer not to say because they had no idea what it meant. But this is a sizable sample size, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's questions to be asked here, but this is not going to be stuff that's going to be solved by us because we are not healthcare data wranglers. We are going to be reporting whatever the data wranglers come up with next. So hopefully they will be looking into this. But I don't know. I don't want to put out there that like this is because of abuse in the home of trans people because I don't know. But it was just something that I thought of. And it sort of rung a bell with the data from the Gallup transphobic hate crime report. But I could be pattern matching, and it could be totally bullshit. So take that with as many grains of salt as you can carry, dear listener.
Indeedy. All right, well, yeah, I'm sure we'll keep an eye on what the data wonks come out with and, identifying statistically significant trends and whatnot. But we are going to move on to our final news story. So finally and very quickly, non-gendered campaigner Christy Ellen Cain, who we've spoken about before, per 30-year mission to force the government to include the option for an X marker on passports will continue on the 12th and 13th of July as the case reaches the UK Supreme Court. Now, this will obviously have massive ramifications for the trans community as, if Cain is successful, the government will be forced to offer an X option under sex on passports. This decision could also lead on to the government eventually being forced in the courts to legally recognise non-binary, non-gendered and other gender identities that do not fit within the current binary. So this is a very important case, and we have linked to Cain's live journal on this episode's reference sheet, which is linked in the description. Per post also includes a link so you can watch the stream of the case as it is heard over the 12th and 13th of July, and we will have a breakdown of what occurred in the court when we do our next episode. So, yes.
Yeah, this has been a long time coming.
It has.
Christy Ellen Cain has been on this for so long. I think that Per has the issue in the community of being around doing this for so long. Kind of like with my ADHD brain. If an object in my room is placed in a place, eventually I will stop seeing it. I will stop knowing that it's there. And I think a lot of people forget that Christy Ellen Cain's case is there happening and has been going on all along because they've just been doing it for so long. So it's important to not forget that this is happening because the ramifications on the trans community in potentially a very positive way, could be enormous. This could be a landmark ruling that opens the door for maybe Gender Recognition Act reform happening through the courts. That is a possible.
Wouldn't that be super? Yes, indeed.
A lot of things would have to line up for that to happen. A lot of different court challenges and judicial reviews and all sorts of things really have to happen before that is the case. But that is a possibility, a very, very slim one that is worth, and that makes this case worth following. So please do. If you have the attention span for it, because court stuff is really fucking boring. It's a boring thing I've ever seen in my life.
It can be a bit dry, can't it? But this one is important, and as we say, we will be onto that when there is more information.
Yeah.
But this could be landmark, and it could, little dominoes. You've seen that meme where it's a little domino at one place and then leading to a big domino up at the other end. This could be one of those.
Yeah, and it is the UK Supreme Court, so it is a big deal.
It is.
And this isn't the end of the road if Per does lose, if Ellen Cain does lose in this one, because Per can take it on to the European Court of Human Rights and all sorts of places. So this is not going to be the end of things if Cain is not successful. But we will see. All right, let's go to the meat. So that was the news, and let's go on straight to the meat. So I went to a thing.
You did, an actual thing that was happening outside.
I know. I went to a thing outside. I got the dust off my my dictaphone, which was literally dusty, and actually report on a thing outside of the house. And so here is a package I've put together of my experiences at Trans Pride London that happened very recently. Take it away, me. Trans Pride London snuck up on me. Like so many in our community, the COVID-19 pandemic, and especially the period of what I have begun calling the plague year of March 2020 to March 2021, really took its toll. My mental health has always been difficult to maintain, but that period for myself was the hardest time of my life. I won't be alone in that. I knew Trans Pride London was happening in the back of my head, but what was a distant promise became an imminent reason to get out of bed, pack my bag and get out into the world. Covering Prides has always been my favourite part of doing this thing, because Pride season is one of the few times I'm actually expected to be there. In life as a trans person who is outed by my voice wherever I go, the most common reaction to me that I see is surprise. Nobody expects a trans person to be anywhere, but at Prides, I'm not only the kind of person who is expected to be there, but at Prides I can truly be the quite boring mid-30s woman I am. I carry a tension with me in the cisgender world, and I rarely notice it until it's gone. And trans prides especially are when I notice that I am truly, truly relaxed and truly able to be boring. Trans Pride London was founded and launched in 2019, and I covered the first event for this podcast. There was a second in 2020, but I was unable to attend any events due to my mental health reaching its lowest point ever since I've been a person. But I had enough in the tank to make my way to the tube station this time for Trans Pride London 2021, and I was able to make it to Green Park Station to meet some friends. So I arrived at the starting point, Wellington Arch, just off the main plot of Hyde Park. At first, there were fewer than 100 people there, but over the next 2 hours it became a mass of thousands. Thinking back to music festivals I've attended, I wouldn't be surprised if there was 5,000 people in attendance. The march began, and I ran to the front to take pictures and live tweet the whole thing whilst recording as much as I could on my dictaphone. The police presence for a central London protest was light. There were many dangers facing everyone who attended, and the level of danger had to be multiplied by just how many things about you make you a target. There were fascists on the streets, COVID-19 was and is still a significant health risk, and the police presence, as light as it may have been compared to other events I've attended, could have turned dangerous any time if they desired it to. Thankfully, that did not appear to happen. Leading the march was a BSL interpreter and a group of disabled attendees flanked by stewards who were assisting them. The first Trans Pride London have received some criticism for not considering the needs of disabled people, but this year those criticisms appear to have been very well addressed. Many people took the microphone and led the march in righteous, authentic bellowing, and I couldn't help myself from joining in at times. During the last 15 minutes of the march, a woman took the microphone. Now, I originally intended to make a short clip of her speaking to upload to the podcast Twitter account, maybe 30 seconds, but what she said and how she said it was so amazing, I ended up videoing her for the rest of the march. Her name was Alexis Meshida. She's a model, a black transgender woman who has spoken previously at Black Lives Matter protests last year, and she needs to be seen and heard by everyone. Here she is showing you exactly why.
British trans women are valid. British trans women are valid. British trans women of colour 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 are valid. Trans youth are valid. Trans youth are valid. It seems to be all the time that we see many of our leaders and many people who are doing so much work in our community having to almost offer themselves, sacrifice themselves for us. Why? Why is that? Because the Tories don't give a fuck. Because the British government does not give a fuck. Because they are constantly, systematically denying our work, denying who we are, and telling us our problems don't matter with that absolute lies. That's absolute lies. Trans issues are valid. Trans issues are valid. Blockers save lives. Blockers save lives. Blockers save lives. Protect trans youth. Protect trans youth.
So we arrived at Soho Square and gathered around a concreted area to listen to the speakers. The vibe from the crowd was incredible. I cannot say for sure what everyone was feeling, but I can say that as a journalist who was reporting on the horrors facing our community during all the lockdowns, alone in my bedroom, unable to see my community, I did some crying. Yeah, I'm not ashamed to admit that. I did some tears. The intense feelings of isolation melted away as I saw my place in this community, in my community. A couple of people came up to me and told me they knew who I was and thanked me for what I do. As small as this thing me and Ashley made is, I'm so grateful for it, as I could see for the first time in so long where my place is in this community. And I think a big part of the day was a lot of people looking around and realising that they have a place in this community. And I think that was reflected in the mood of what I could describe as joy, righteous anger, relief, and solidarity. The first speaker was Munro Bergdorf, who needs very little introduction. A model and activist, she has greatly suffered in public for speaking out and being brutally honest about how absurd the UK is when it comes to issues of race, sexuality and gender identity. Here's what she had to say about Trans Pride London, our community and our identities.
This is not a moment. We are are not a moment. This is our legacy. As different as we are as individuals, we are reflections of each other, inextricably linked and spiritually bonded by community. This is evidence of community. I'm shaking! We're infinitely stronger together. We cannot let idiotic counter-movements like LGB Alliance and TERFs or gender-critical feminism tear us apart. To me, transness is divinity in its purest sense. To live in a world that does not see you, that ignores your suffering, that legislates against your existence, that strives to control your bodily autonomy, that simultaneously fetishizes and demonizes our image. That is divine to resist that daily. Still, we show up and we show out and we keep on going. To me, that is divine, that is strength, that is worthy of love, respect, and peace.
Next was Kai Griffin, a non-binary intersex person of colour, and an actor who you may be familiar with if you watch Hollyoaks. He shone a light on intersex issues in his speech and made the point that 1.7% of all people are intersex, meaning there are 1 million intersex people in the UK. That's maybe twice, maybe 3 times as many people as there are trans people. Of course there is crossover, as Kai absolutely represents, but you know what I'm saying. Intersex people are invisible even though there is a tremendous number of them. He spoke of how his life specifically had been relatively happy, but many intersex people were not as lucky as him. Here he is making a call to action.
The joy we experience in being ourselves and seeing our siblings be themselves, being able to love and give love, to be able to thrive and watch our community thrive is what motivates us and pushes us to continue doing the work that makes those pockets of joy deeper. If the world we live in doesn't give us the option to thrive, then let's build a new one. A world where intersex lives are protected against discrimination, mutilation, and have the bodily autonomy they deserve. A world where trans lives are given the health care they need and aren't at risk every time they leave their homes. A world where not conforming to binaries is celebrated and not shunned. Because this system is broken and we need to transcend.
Lucia Blake was one of the original founders of Trans Pride London in 2019, and I was astonished to learn that she had actually stepped down from organising this year's event so she could, in her words, enjoy the event itself as an attendee. She told the crowd that she had come out of hospital the night before after experiencing some health issues, but she made sure to attend to show her support for the organisers of this year's event. She talked about how hard it had been to create this event as a young trans woman who made mistakes and didn't know everything. It can be so easy to take for granted events like this, and what it must cost the organisers to put them on. And then she talked about the cost of being trans in her life.
And sometimes I still, even to this day, even though I'm fucking in the best place to be trans, I still feel so fucking alone in that struggle some days. And some days I'm literally just like, some days it's just so fucking hard.
We love you! We love you!
I think we're just doing the groundwork now, so that in the future things can be different. I just think I already know that the next generation's gonna have it easier than us, as I've had it easier than the trans women before me. And so we're gonna keep fighting, we're gonna stay united, we're gonna appreciate each other, we're gonna love each other. And we're going to move towards a society that we deserve. Thank you all so much. Lucia!
Joe Alloway is an activist who is part of We Exist London, a grassroots group that runs a trans healthcare fund that creates pop-up community spaces for the London trans community. For their speech, they were wearing a pink dress and stood in front of a picture of Sophie Gwen Williams, an activist who passed away in May of this year. What follows is almost the entirety of Joe's tribute to their friend and a passionate, authentic call to action.
She was an artist, a community organiser, a musician, a teacher, a leader. She was utterly hilarious, vibrant, courageous, and totally chaotic. She lived her values in everything she did. She believed in the power of our community. She took up space as a trans person, and she encouraged others to do the same. She understood the basic right of living as you are, and she saw the pure injustice of trans people being so often made to feel they were doing something wrong just by living as ourselves. Sophie set up a queer feminist space in Belfast, and together we set up We Exist in London, a trans-led community initiative and healthcare fund. Sophie fought every day. Sophie was brave, she was selfless, she was magnificent. She also died aged 28 on the 20th of May this year. And she died in the house we shared together because she was trans. The 5 years she spent on the waiting list for healthcare being just one example of the systemic violence she faced every single day. She was not alone, as we know. The most basic rights to healthcare, to housing, to a workplace safe from abuse, to a life free from violence are routinely denied to trans people. Whilst the current atmosphere in the UK is abhorrent, it is not a shock. Hostility to trans people for the simple fact of being trans is not new. And nor are our pleas for solidarity from the wider queer community. I will be blunt. We should not have to fucking ask for this. Yes. Should be a given. Yes. History shows us this. In 1973, Sylvia Rivera stood in New York City to a crescendo of boos and jeers from a predominantly white, middle-class gay crowd and said, "I have been beaten. I have had my nose broken. I have been thrown in jail. I have lost my job. I have lost my apartment for gay liberation, and you all treat me this way." Her words ring as true today as they did back then, and that is appalling.
Shame! 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 Shame!
Decades we've been at this, justifying our existence, begging for the basics, having queer people support us when it's easy, but far too often backing away when it is hard. That's not enough. We're in a fight for our lives and we need backup. We should not have to do this by ourselves. We should not have to battle for years on waiting lists at the same time as campaigning for the right to have a job where we won't be abused. So we need loud, proud queers acting in solidarity who are actually willing to take some risks to support us. Last year, Sophie stood here and said, you cannot consume our excellence and our talent and ignore us when we are being treated violently the next fucking day. Sophie didn't want guilt. She wanted collaboration, and she was, of course, absolutely right. You know, we all know that our rights have never been given to us willingly. From throwing bricks and stones at Stonewall, to halting Westminster Bridge, to abseiling down the House of Lords. It is bold action together that has brought us our rights. So this is a direct call out to the queer community to step up now for trans people. Trans pride is not the end of our fight, and it should not be the last time you show up. None of us are free till all of us are free, and there is no community without liberation.
Every speaker I saw, and there were many that I could not fit into this podcast, was amazing. Truly amazing. But Joe's speech stayed with me. They articulated so much of what the current trans experience is today and made it clear that the community has lost one of its best. I think that after Joe, there was a total surprise and shock as Kay Tempest took to the stage. Well, I say stage, it was a concrete slab with a microphone, but you know what I mean. Kay Tempest is a renowned spoken word artist and writer. They came out as non-binary a few years ago, and I don't think anyone expected them to be there, including the organisers themselves, who said the Kay's appearance was not planned. Here is Kay's performance.
I'm overwhelmed and full of love. Thank you so much for this. Pride by degrees, it's relative. I've carried my shame like a drunk friend, dragged through the days of my life. Damn dysphoria. On a scale of can't bear it to pride, I'm more proud than I was, but less proud than I'd like of the beautiful thing that we make when we make it. Imagine a vast air inside a drawn breath, sudden Eden. Look, if your pride is hard to get hold of, as fickle as wind and so tight round your shoulders, you have to dig deep to keep motion. I love you for all your complexity. I love you for all your complexity, all your soft edges, all your torn corners, all the long nights when you poured forth and split the dull granite to raw quartz. No judgment, just movement. Keep walking towards it. You're doing it right. I'm all for you. You're doing it right. I'm all for you. You're doing it right.
So, Abigail Thorne absolutely needs no introduction here. In less than a year, she went from a very well-respected ally to the community to being one of our most prominent members. Before the speeches began, I was talking to an organiser asking if there was a list of speakers I could steal, and realised that I was standing right next to her. Years ago, I interviewed Abigail for this podcast before she had come out as trans herself. I turned to her and we chatted briefly. She expressed some nervousness at speaking, which surprised me as she speaks to millions through her YouTube channel and is a working actor of stage and screen. But the truth is that she's in the very early stages of living authentically as herself, whilst living under the pressure of being an intensely public figure. Those early years being out for any trans person aren't exactly easy. I know that mine weren't. Can't imagine what it must be like to be as known as Abigail Thorne and as watched as she is. In her speech, she acknowledged how she was very new to the community and said that she was no great leader or speaker, and that she was privileged to have been asked to speak in spite of her relative inexperience as an openly transgender person. But then she turned to the humiliation that we all feel of having to demand the bare minimum and potentially facing police violence for making those demands. And then she had this to say.
I don't think that being trans is a burden. I don't think that being trans is a curse. I think it is a gift.
Yeah!
Possession of them, to name yourself, to take your destiny by the scruff of the neck and say, no, God damn it, come fate into the lists, this is my life and I will be the mistress of it.
Abigail only told one lie that day. She's actually a really fucking great speaker. I really hope she is called to do it more. So after the speech was wrapped up, I wanted to take a pulse of the attendees. So I walked around and talked to some. First I spoke to Nathan about their Plague Year and what Trans Pride London had done for him. So, how was your Plague Year?
Oh, it was tough. Being stuck at home with my parents who aren't exactly accepting. Me and my sister had to run away from home a few times. It was quite difficult, actually, yeah. So it's really nice to get out again.
That sounds like a tough year. I mean, it's said that everyone has had a tough year, but I think the members of our community had it a lot tougher. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
Like, have you heard that from your friends, some trans friends and stuff?
Yeah, it's been a really tough time for everyone, even my trans friends who don't live with their family anymore. It's been really isolating.
Yeah, it really has, but what was the day meant to you? Like, we've just heard the speakers, we've done the march a while ago. How do you feel now?
I feel amazing, honestly. I've shed a few tears when I was listening to the speeches because it just feels incredible to be out and be with people that are like me.
How did you feel before today, and how do you feel now?
Before today, I had been feeling pretty awful. Like I said, home life is tough, but and seeing all the government drawbacks on trans rights recently, it's been really difficult to go through. But coming here and being with the community and seeing a bunch of people and hearing these hopeful speeches, it's really meant a lot. And I think my hope has definitely been restored.
I think everyone can relate to Nathan's story. I know I did. After I talked to Nathan, I walked around some more and I found Elby, a non-binary person who was sitting near the back of the square, and I talked to them to get their take on things. How was your Plague Year?
My Plague Year? Interesting phrasing. But it was hard, difficult. Yeah, I was at home most of the time.
Just stuck there desperately scrolling through Netflix until it stops.
Literally. Netflix was too overwhelming. I couldn't even get to the scrolling part. But yeah, it was very long.
How's the day been? What has it meant to you today?
Today's been good. Being around trans community is really lovely, and it's just very nourishing. Yeah, it's really strange, obviously, after like the lockdown as well, being around so many people. But yeah, if I would want to be around anyone, it's trans people, so it's great.
How do you feel? How did you feel before coming here, and how do you feel now the day is done?
Unsuspecting, I would say, before coming here. I didn't really have any expectations. I was happy to just come to this protest with my friends. And now I've been here, I'm even more happy I came. It's exceeded my non-expectations. And yeah, again, I feel really nourished.
Finally, I stumbled upon Nim Ralph, someone I'd actually met and gotten to know over the lockdowns through Zoom chats, direct messages, and all the other ways people have communicated while stuck in our homes. Nim is a non-binary activist and organiser of tremendous experience who always has something to say that is worth hearing. I encourage you to listen to them and follow them, links in the description. Here is what they had to say about the day.
Hey Nim, it's so good to see you in the flesh for once. How's it going?
Not just on Zoom.
Yeah.
It's really nice to actually, physically see you and everybody else here today.
So, how has your plague year been?
It's been hard and long. I mean, it's been hard universally, right, for everybody. I think one of the things that's really standing out to me in this moment is just how burnt out a lot of trans folks are after the last year. I just had a friend, a trans disabled person of colour friend who just died, and I think the isolation for trans people this year, on top of the grief and stress of the pandemic, has just been really intense. So yeah, it's been a hard, long year.
Yeah, I mean, even though a lot of people may not know personally someone who is no longer with us, I think everyone has heard of someone who is no longer with us. It's been a very, very tough year for deaths in the community.
It really has, and when you layer on health inequalities, particularly for trans people of colour and trans disabled people, the health inequalities just of COVID, and then you layer that also with the additional isolation for trans people who normally rely on community spaces to share resources and support and affirmation. I think there's a kind of just triple whammies for trans people this year, on top of a year that's hard for everybody.
Yeah, but getting to today, how's today been for you?
I mean, it's been so great to be here. I've been overwhelmed. I haven't been around people in so long. It's not gonna lie, it's been overwhelming. But I think in a year that's been so isolating, today is such a beautiful salve to that in a lot of ways. To see so many people. I came to the first one 2 years ago, and that felt great. But I mean, honestly, it felt very white, and I think coming today is still very white, more white ratio-wise than a lot of even LGBT spaces these days, I think, but much less white than year one. Sorry, I'm rambling. It's just the sheer number of people who've turned out is so much bigger, and that gives me so much hope. I think I have noticed that there's still quite a lot of work for us to do as trans activists, because the tone of the chants on the march and the signs and things were very trans rights are human rights, or what do we want trans rights, when do we want them now? And I think in a way it's been slightly disheartening to me that our political asks and orientation is so low, and so I and others were trying to get some other chants going, trans rights aren't enough, liberation now, and some other things to really widen our scope of we deserve more. We don't just want rights, we want liberation, we want access, we want free accessible healthcare, we want housing, we want work, all these things. So yeah, I feel
too many slogans that don't necessarily communicate the struggles that we face.
Yeah, I think the focus on rights is that the struggle on rights is the end goal just feels like we haven't got enough collective vision about what we actually want and need as trans people. But some of the placards I think did a great job of that. Both being humorous but also demanding more. But I just felt in the crowd, I felt disheartened of we're still only asking for rights, and kind of trans rights are human rights. That's a really basic thing to say. We need more than recognition that trans rights are human rights. We need our demand. What are our demands? What do we want for us? What does it mean for us to live full and joyful lives? And I just wish that. I guess I'm taking it as a personal challenge for how do we make the chance next year to just ask for that much more, demand that much more for trans people. We deserve that much.
How did you feel before you came here today, and how do you feel now?
Great question. I think, I've been feeling, I mentioned before, the pandemic is very isolating. I felt a bit isolated and lonely this morning. I was both worried about coming out and being in a crowd and not knowing, I mean, I've got friends with me, but like not knowing people, and then also worried about coming out and being in a crowd, and then knowing too many people and that being really overwhelming. And so I think I came with a lot of social anxiety, as any good, earnest queer does. And I think I've had some awkward like hellos to people while I was adapting to the crowds. But now that we're here and we're in Soho Square and it's the end of the day and people are just like, you know, trans people and those in our families and communities are out here hanging out with us, and everybody's just having a beautiful time with loads of different expressions of transness and gender, and it's beautiful. It's nice. It's really nice. It feels like, oh, I can be myself right now, and it's been a long time, you know.
So before I spoke to Nim, I believe the day had been pretty perfect. The speakers were the most diverse collection of people I'd ever seen at an event like this, and only saw the day as an unmitigated success. But whilst Nim acknowledged that the day had been incredible, they made me realise that there is always more that we could do, and more our community can aim for, and that we should never forget that. I think they were spot on with that. But after that, I decided to sign off and take my leave to Old Compton Street with some friends to drink cider until the sun went down. But my main takeaways were, this event was never going to make real giant changes to society. The political class or the media were never going to listen to it, and those who passed us by almost certainly did not learn much about the issues we face beyond what was chanted. But what I saw was a community who had been battered and abused by society itself, pummeled by the pandemic, and they still showed up in spite of it all and made it clear that we are a community. They sent the message that no trans person is alone. We all have our place in this community, and I'm convinced that this march may have saved lives, as people who have suffered from the isolation we have all seen and experienced saw just how not alone we are. In the days after, photos I took from the event went wider than I expected online. Trans people up and down the country saw Trans Pride London, and we didn't need the press to do that. We reported on this event ourselves. All the people that took pictures and social media videos and did snap talks and whatever to get the word out about what this was. Our coverage will have been reached by hundreds of thousands of trans people and given them hope. And that is what I got from the day, hope. This is probably one of the best days of my life because of that. So I urge you, if you are feeling alone, cast aside the potential dangers and go find your community. There is hope for the future for trans people in the UK, and that hope comes from us. Go find it.
Well,
I would say there was a lot of fun. There was also a lot of, as you could probably tell from what I said, very, very deep, moving, emotional things going on in my brain. But yeah, I mean, like I said, maybe one of the best days of my life.
And in a sense, that's one of the reasons Pride exists, you know? It's kind of letting people who may not be out or whatever, and, you know, they see the parade go past or see the event taking place, and it's like, oh, there's a community. I could be part of the community. I could go spend some time with people like me and listen to what they're saying. And so it's one of the reasons why Pride's so valuable, really, even if, you know, obviously it's been difficult in lockdown and most of them didn't take place last year, but there was some manner of, you know, community gathering of some sort, even if it was, you know, online or through Zoom or something. That sense of community can be very, very important.
I didn't mention this in the package, but
yes,
last time I went, they started going off in one direction through Wellington Arch, and this time they did not. At the last minute, they seemed to have gone round a different way, so I had to run like the Dickens to make my way to the front to get all of the stuff, and that I got a sweat on. I did the work. But yeah,
you literally did the legwork.
Yeah, but this was definitely a protest first. I mean, Pride is a protest and this very much lived up to that moniker. But
as it should.
Yeah, but going back to what Nim said, I mean, they raised some very good points that I didn't think about how the effectiveness of some of the chants may not be as much as they could be. And I thoroughly agree with them. I didn't really think of it that way before, but my angle on the day was, I don't think people in power necessarily were going to listen to this, and they did not, clearly. But what this did was provide a tremendous mental health boost for a community that has suffered horrendously under COVID-19. You heard that in the interviews I did, and also got that from the speeches that I saw. And I'll be linking to full unedited speeches that I'm going to stick on the YouTube. hopefully by the time this comes out, or very shortly afterwards. So keep checking the reference sheet. I'll be uploading them like the Dickens. But yeah. And so I got the feeling from that, like I said in the package, that I think that this may have saved lives. And we won't never know that for sure, because it's very hard to tell if you saved a life.
Yes.
In mental health terms. Like, it's one of those things where you don't know because the person just keeps on living.
You don't know because we don't know.
Yeah, but I can see a lot of people being isolated and suffering from mental health issues in COVID during all of the lockdowns. And that is backed up by the GP patient survey that we reported on earlier.
Yeah.
So coming out and seeing, I mean, I don't know for sure, but thousands of trans people marched the streets as a mental health boost. I think that was incredibly valuable and incredibly required and have saved lives, I think.
Indeed. I mean, you and I have participated in the Trans Pride Brighton, haven't we? And that feeling of walking down the street, obviously next to the sea, so it's a bit different from being in the middle of a city, but just being there with so many other people and the flags flying and the sun shining, if the sun is shining, because sometimes it chucks it down. And it's quite a feeling, isn't it? And I'm really glad that you got to go there and sort of witness all the speakers and the performances. And I'm really glad you had a good time, even if obviously some of the people were talking about slightly heavy issues. I am glad, just as a friend, darling, that you had a good time.
It was so good. It was so good. And afterwards, went out in Soho for a bit with a few friends, and it was just nice. We went to a pub and had drinks in the same presence, which is something that people have been allowed to do for a while now, but I haven't done it that much. I was also good friends, and we just shot the shit. Shout out to my buddies who walked around with me and stuff, where we found a pub and drank fruity cider, and it was pretty great.
Ooh, fruity.
Yeah. I do like a fruity cider. I do.
Oh yeah. Fruity friends and fruity cider. That's absolutely, it's a good pride. It's a good pride mix, isn't it? We've got Manchester Pride coming up at the end of August, which I will no doubt be going to some of, but I'm on holiday and I'm like the week immediately before it, so I'm actually returning on the Saturday. So for the first time since I moved to Manchester, so for the first time in 11 years, I am not going to be able to see or participate in the parade.
Oh no.
Well, never mind.
Never mind indeed. But Manchester Pride goes on for 3 days, isn't it?
Oh yeah, it's the whole bank holiday weekend, so you've got the stuff on the Friday afternoon to Friday night, and then Saturday, Sunday, and then obviously the Monday. And the Monday ends with the HIV vigil, of course, in Sackville Gardens, and that's always quite nice, reflective. Anyway, I think that's enough of that.
Yeah, that's enough of this. So thank you for listening to all of that. There was a lot in there.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I hope you enjoyed what you heard and learned a lot, and we will see you next time.
Yes, indeed, for episode 67. And in the meantime, you can catch us obviously on the social medias, facebook.com/whatthetrans, Twitter @whatthetrans. We have whatthetrans.medium.com, and we have a shiny, fancy website, which is whatthetrans.com.
Yes, check all of those things out, because they're online and we put them there, and it would be a shame if they were not seen.
Indeed. We put effort into those, get some eyes on them. I'm kidding, obviously. But if you do need to look over some stuff or check out the reference sheets, obviously you can see that at the very bottom of wherever you're listening to this podcast. But until next time, thank you for listening and goodbye.
Bye-bye. This episode of What the Trans was produced by me, Michelle Snow, and Ashley Talbot, the other one.
Me.
And was edited by me.
And we would like to give special thanks to our Patreon producers, who are
Georgina Young,
Ty Griffiths,
Alex Liddell,
Florence Stanley,
Kay Passon,
Helen _
Mallory Moore,
Chrissy Jarvis,
Normal Name,
Nick Ross,
Alice Chalkley,
Melody Nix,
Zoe Laura Meyer,
Fiona Punchard,
John,
Lynn Mackay,
Nick Duffy,
C.B. Bailey,
Gordon Cameron,
Peter Kimball,
Rachel T.S.,
Wen Riverup,
Vic Parsons,
Tila Wild,
Atom James,
Vanessa Billington,
Rowan Littlejohns,
Desiree Markland,
Patreon user,
Derek Victor,
Sarah Bedfull of Dogs Halliwell,
Emma Doyle,
Mike Dickinson,
Owen Willis,
Catherine,
Mina,
Elliot McVeigh,
Cassius Adair,
Tuck,
Melissa Brooks,
Ian Cumber,
Maddie Bell,
Karakan 12,
April Heller,
Sophie Lewis,
Alexandra Lilly,
Claire Scott,
Ariadne Pena,
Lauren O'Nions,
Mara Reynolds,
Bernard's Pink Jelly Bean,
Lenos,
and Chris Hubley. Thank you so much for supporting us and listening to this. Goodbye.
Bye.